Hello all. Welcome to Uniface Universe, the session about connecting to web community. This session will be presented by me, Jyoti Singh and Hartan Laidekar. In this session, we will help you to give you enough information to understand why would you choose Uniface as a web technology. It's one of the most productive web development tool available out there, and it is suitable for any kind of web development need, being it's the plain HTML form submission, or for the REST application development, for an interactive web application development, or for mobile application development. It's one model to fit them all. So it has also a lot to reuse when you have a client server application and you want to migrate them to a web application, for example. So the agenda of this session is we start with our mission, then we will focus on different ways to use Uniface as a web technology. We will touch upon the DSP enhancements, and finally a demo about DSP client-side formatting. The mission of this session is to grow the Uniface community, which means connecting to the non-Uniface community. And it is also possible by doing connecting to the non-Uniface web technologies. So the question is how Uniface can be used in building a web application. The answer is there are several possible ways, and it's your choice. Uniface can be used as a REST provider, it can be used as a REST consumer, it can be used as a web application server for a plain form submission, and it can also be used as a web application server for rich AJAX-based application development. Now, if you have a non-Uniface HTTP client, you can connect Uniface as a REST provider at the backend. And the communication of the data can be any standard format, for example, JSON, XML, text, or CSL. Similarly, if you have a non-Uniface backend, you can have a Uniface REST provided client using which you can activate to non-Uniface backend. And again, the communication data format can be any standard format, being it's JSON, XML, text, or CSL. If you have the requirement to build an end-to-end infrastructure which is based on HTTP protocol, Uniface can be also fitted for that. You can use Uniface as a REST client as well as on the backend. And the format can again be any standard format. Uniface can also be used as a web application server when you have a typical need to handle regular form submission requirement. In that case, Uniface on the backend side, USPs can be used, and client can be anything, whether it's a browser or anything which has a requirement to send a regular form submission to the backend. And Uniface can handle that. And the formats can again be any standard format. Also, it's worth to mention some of the statements provided by Uniface, which can handle different data formatting. For example, if the data is coming as a JSON, there are different Uniface statements which are able to handle that. For example, for JSON, there are statements like JSON to struct, which will convert a JSON into struct and then convert back from using struct to JSON into JSON again. Similarly, there is XML to struct and struct to XML. There are also other statements like $webinfo, which is there to provide enable information on the data coming from the client to the server, and similarly goes from the server to the client. Similarly, there are webget and webgen statements. They are mainly used for loading and submitting the data in USPs. Uniface can be used as a web application server for interactive web application development. For that, DSP will be used. We can see the architecture is quite similar as USPs, but the main thing to note is DSP client on the web browser side. So there the DSP client is a JavaScript, is a Uniface provided JavaScript client, which will actually handle all the capability of handling interactive internet application development aspects. DSPs can also be used for mobile-based application development, where Uniface provides the hybrid mobile solution capability for iOS and Android platforms. Their hybrid solution, meaning Cordova, is used as a framework to wrap those applications. And in order to access the device, the Cordova plugins can be used for that. So going a bit deeper into the DSPs, DSP application follows the model-driven approach where all the model definitions are defined once on the server, but they are also available on the client. The definitions, for example, occurrence repetitions and the field level properties, for example, data type, syntax, valrep, layout, etc. By having all the information available on the client makes the client it provides the client the ability to make certain decisions and make certain actions on it. For example, formatting on the client, validation and error reporting on the client, which basically leads to a faster performance on the client and a better security overall. So having a client-side validation does not take away the need to have the server-side validation, because client-side validation is just an additional thing. Client does the validation based upon the declarative rules, but additionally server validation always happens, and it does the validations based upon the declarative and the procedural rules. Now, DSP approach is to open up communication on the HTML DOM level, which leads to integrate with any third-party CSS framework. And one of such communication API is, for example, field level API, get bound element, will give an access to the HTML DOM element which is bound to a Uniface field. DSP also aims to have more native and standard constructions. For example, HTML5 control supports, and enabling native control support will also mean that all data communication also needs to happen in native JavaScript data type. Providing native control support on client also means that we also need to align the communication between client and server accordingly, which means we also had to send the communication data from the server to the client and vice versa in an unformatted stream. And that unformatted stream is using internal Uniface data type. Using internal Uniface data type is beneficial in some cases, for example in numeric and float data type, where the number precision in the JavaScript is lower than compared to the Uniface backend precision, which means over the communication channel we can send the data which has higher precision, which can be handled by the JavaScript. Now, communication with the HTML DOM is still in the JavaScript native data type, which means when the data is presented to HTML DOM, it is handled in the JavaScript native data type. And whereas the communication back again is in JavaScript native data type, whereas communication with the client and the server goes on the unformatted internal data syntax. It also makes sure that there is no information loss in the round trip. For opening up DSP more, the client is enriched more to perform more tasks. And one of the tasks is, for example, validation and error reporting. So DSP provides a default way to report validation error on the DSP client, which results from client-side or server-side validation. Error reporting has also been enhanced in that way. Before, the error reporting on the client side is always being done in a default way, but now it has been enhanced to be done in a customized way, where the error reporting can be customized using CSS by applying CSS styles, as well using customized code in JavaScript. So there are dedicated web triggers provided on the DSPs which can be used for the validation error reporting in customized way for the client-side error reporting as well as on the server-side error reporting. Also, worth to notice that to complement these customized error reporting, there are also web triggers are available to reset those errors, because once those errors are set using customized way, they needs to be reset as well when they needs to be done. So there are dedicated web triggers provided for that purpose. Another aspect of opening up DSP client more and making the client richer also means handling of display and formatting on the client. To format on the client, display format needs to be applied, which is defined as the field layout definition in the IDE. So client-side formatting will be applicable for various data types, for example, numeric, float, date, time, and combined date time. But worth to mention that they will be applicable for the widget of input control type text and not for the native data type controls, because handling the native controls is the responsibility of the browser. For example, to display a date in a date picker widget, which is a native widget, it is the responsibility of the browser to format and display the date in the date picker widget. But when the date is displayed using the input control type text, the Uniface will actually format it and display it accordingly. But Uniface also will check if the browser does not support those native controls, and in that case the fallback happens and it will display in the input type text. Additionally, to format on the client, locale of the client needs to be applied as well. So Uniface also provides statement, for example, $webinfo locale, and that statement will enable to control the setting of the client-side locale from the server itself. Next, we are going to show a demo application, and the demo application is to showcase a Uniface DSP application, which is for display, formatting, and maintaining the data in different data types, for example, numeric, float, date, time, and combined date time, and how to present them based upon the locale selected on the client.
This is not a real business application, but just a demo on how to construct a simple language system for DSPs where the data formatting happens on the browser. The page is a single DSP showing some date and time and number fields, and all the data is formatted on the browser in a language or a locale specific way. There are some buttons for retrieval, and here there is a drop-down list to select a language. By default, this application uses the language of the browser, which is in my case Dutch. This means the labels are in Dutch and the formatting happens also in a Dutch way. If I would switch the preferred language to, for example, English, and I'm going to reload my page, it will switch to English. So how is this constructed? I have a simple DSP with a basic layout. It has the buttons in the header. It's a table header construction. It has the buttons and the drop-down list, the labels of the fields, and here in the body with the occurrence repetition are the data fields. The structure is the fields, some control buttons, and if we look at the display types of the various data fields, it's all an NLS kind of formatting. Numeric, NLS long, that's a long date, etc. If we look at the code, at the top some mapping to map the locale to $language, which is the Uniface $language. There is another define to define the valrep of the language selector drop down, and there is a define mapping that maps the default language of the browser to our NLS to our application's locale. The execute trigger is not much, it's just doing a simple retrieve showing the data. The pre-activate is then the thing where we figure out the locale of the application. So in here we reread the cookie and get the locale from the cookie. If that cookie is not specified, it reads the accept language attribute of the HTTP request header. And that's then your default language if there is no language specified and available in the cookie. At that moment, the locale is then used to assign $NLS locale, to also put the server in that locale, and it is assigned to $language so that also any translations are done properly. At this moment we also set $valrep for the select list, so that also the validation of the select list is always in sync with what the browser displays. And we set the default value of the drop-down button. The rest of the pre-activate is all pretty default. The post-activate is mainly also default, except for some additions in the section where we handle the full page response. In there we set the values of the buttons, so they are done as init values, so initial values, so they become part of the web definitions. That's why you have to do it just before the web definitions. If you do it after, you're too late. And at the end of this section, we also instruct the browser to follow the locale by setting $webinfo locale. And in this case, we just let it follow $NLS locale, which we set just a little bit earlier. That's basically it. If you now switch the locale in the application to, for example, Deutsch, then you see that again all the translation happens and all the display is done differently. And that can be very extreme for Dutch people like me. In Japanese, selecting the language happens in this field, which is the valwrap field, the drop-down box, and it has a simple on-change trigger with only an input scope, because the output is ignored anyway, because after that we want to have a full page refresh. We just read the value of the field, assign it to $NLS locale, we update the cookie, and after that we instruct the browser to refresh itself, so to force a full page. So that's done via a web activate of this operation of the current instance. So at component level there is a web operation defined here, which is called navigate to URL. We give it the URL, which is basically the URL of the current DSP, and then simply in JavaScript the Windows location object is being assigned with a URL, and that forces the browser to reload itself, causing Uniface to generate a full page response. And then the whole thing that I talked about in the post activate kicks in. So why is it relevant to do data formatting on the client and not on a server? If you are doing it on a server, then the client just deals with formatted strings and it has no knowledge about what the data actually means. So any client-side validation is not possible. Instead, we just send the raw data to the browser, including the field definitions, including data type, file wraps, syntax definitions, and display formats, so that the client can do all the work, but also it can do the formatting. So this field knows it is a number formatted in a Dutch way. And if I would add another comma here, it will just reject it, because the comma is the decimal separator and you can only have one of that. So that is the reason why you want to have client-side formatting. That's it. I hope you found it useful. It was very quickly. If you need to slow it down, just pause the video. The sample is also available on Uniface on the Uniface website. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the demo. I hope that helped you to give you enough information to make the decision on when to use Uniface as a web technology, as it still stands the most productive web development tool available out there. It can be used to cater all your web application development needs based upon whether it's a simple form submission methodology, it's a REST kind of construction, whether it's a mobile application development or an interactive web development. Even if you have a client server application and you want to migrate to the web application, there is still a lot to reuse, which Uniface can provide. Thank you.